Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Fiona O'Byrne. I'm an Assistant Secretary in the Department of Further and Higher Education, Research, Innovation and Science, and I'll be chairing the final session of the day for the next hour or so. It's been a really interesting day so far. I only made it at lunchtime, and the really overwhelming things hitting me is both the volume of activity but also the recognition that there are connections there to be built on and enhanced, and that there's space to do more. And I think we've decided to take this session to bring the Joint Research Centre and European Commission-led Technical Support Instrument project and introduce it to the group of people we have here today. There was a little bit of discussion whether this actually formally marks the official launch of the TSI project in Ireland or not. However, given the range of people we have in the room, I think it would be remiss of us not to have made the TSI project an important focus of today, building on Science Week, building on Public Sector Transformation Week. So unfortunately, we have clashed the event with the presidential inauguration, which has meant we've got bumped from Minister Lawless's diary. He was very keen to come along to show his support for the agenda and just how important it is to really embed evidence-informed policy making in government. But I think the President comes first, so we can understand that. So Minister Lawless has pre-recorded his remarks. So we're going to go to a video, President Lawless. Then I'm going to ask David Maher to talk us through and introduce us to the TSI project, and then we'll go to our last panel of the day. Thanks.
Accordia, conference organisers, distinguished guests, friends, good afternoon to everybody. It's a pleasure to speak with you today, even if it's only by video, amongst colleagues and collaborators who share a deep commitment to the power of knowledge. Today's gathering brings together leading minds in research, policy and public service, and I'm especially pleased to welcome David Maher and his team from the Joint Research Centre in the European Commission. I also want to thank University College Dublin and Maynooth University for their leadership in convening this event and for working collaboratively with my department to make it happen. Ireland is a country that believes in the power of ideas. We've always understood that knowledge is a most valuable resource, and people are our greatest natural asset. As Minister, it is my priority that we fully realise the potential of research and innovation for the benefit of our economy, our society and all our citizens. Ensuring there is a strong connection between the research community and policy making is an important objective in this regard, one of which we've put in the programme for government. We are building a knowledge economy, one where insight, data and discovery fuel innovation, and where research is not just an academic pursuit, but a cornerstone of national progress. That's why my department is now leading Ireland's participation in this new EU Technical Support Instrument project, focusing on supporting evidence-informed policy making for the green and digital transitions. This initiative will provide a valuable opportunity to learn from other countries and how to bring research even closer to the heart of how we do government in Ireland. We've moved from good intentions to concrete actions, and in many ways we've now become a pathfinder for Europe. My department has led the way in putting innovative measures in place to make this ambition real. Ireland is no longer just participating in the conversation, we are helping to shape it. Some of our key achievements include the establishment of Research Ireland with a more comprehensive research remit, appointing a new independent government science advisor, Professor Aoife McLysaght, last year to lead a revised science advice mechanism for Ireland, establishing a civil service research network, bringing research leads across government departments together to address blockages and enabling research policy engagement, the rollout of strategic funding initiatives to build capacity for policy engagement within the higher education research sector, including Research Ireland's Challenge Call and Science Policy Research Programme, promoting fellowships for researchers interested in collaborating on projects within the civil service, and HEA funding to advance a wider societal impact for research, which is supporting research for policy work in UCD and in UL. Also supporting a community of practice of researchers who are interested in working with policymakers. This TSI project is therefore coming at a good time for us. We will build on those achievements, increase professional capacity and collaboration amongst policymakers and the research community for evidence-informed policymaking, and drive innovation in the policy process. This work is part of a wider evidence-informed policymaking movement, and I recognise the achievements of my fellow departments in this respect, including colleagues in the Department of Taoiseach, with evidence use now embedded as a core pillar of the recently published Handbook for Policy Development for Civil Servants. Actions also led out by the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform include public service renewal to strengthen evidence for policy and effectively harness public service data, the ongoing work of the CSO here today to improve accessibility and the use of national data sets by our research community to inform policy responses. My department is also actively encouraging academic and research involvement in public life and in contributing to the solution of societal challenges such as healthcare, the green transition, housing, and infrastructure. The strides made are ensuring that we are moving towards a situation where the decisions that define our society are becoming more strongly backed by evidence. My vision is for a future where policy is driven by people, proof, and purpose. As the ancient Irish triad reminds us, 3 candles illuminate every darkness: truth, nature, and knowledge. In a world of rapid technological change, climate uncertainty, and global tensions, we must offer clarity and reassurance to the public, and that means working with the best available evidence. My goal is to nurture a system where leaders can confidently connect with research and data as tools for decision-making. Ireland's economic success has long been underpinned by knowledge, and the role of research and innovation in sustaining that success is growing. Evidence-informed policymaking is not just a technical exercise, it's a creative and strategic imperative to tackle the complex challenges of our time. I want to foster a modern, dynamic, and resilient evidence base across the public service. Research must bring together the best available data, experience, and insight, and it must be credible, transparent, and accountable. Our task is to ensure that the evidence we use is not only technically sound, but practically relevant to the communities we serve. As one of the greatest statistical minds of the 20th century, George Box once said, "All models are wrong, but some are useful." That's a reminder that evidence must be tailored, not just presented, to address societal challenges and provide better outcomes for citizens. Across government, individual departments fund a significant volume of research activity, but often those efforts are fragmented. There are too many gateways, too much noise between the generation of knowledge and its landing on the policy table. We can no longer do this work without research being at the table, not as an afterthought, but as a partner and active participant. Wise investment in research complements effective use of public funds and strengthens Ireland's economic competitiveness. As a minister, I talked to Dáil and a legislator, I know that quality evidence and rigorous evaluation are essential to good policy and responsible spending. As we continue to foster partnerships across academia, enterprise, and the public sector, we must also build and maintain the trust of citizens. That trust is the cornerstone of a future-ready, dynamic evidence and innovation ecosystem, and I want to see our researchers play an even stronger role in shaping it. The programme for government is clear about how we can go about this, by encouraging academic and research involvement in public life, and in contributing to the solution of key societal challenges. Establishing formal pathways for third-level researchers to inform government policy on critical issues underpinned by internationally recognised research. Scaling up exchange programmes and secondments between academia and government to enhance policy making. And that also means strengthening science advice through the newly established Office of the Government Science Advisor and supporting Research Ireland to lead on innovation and tackle the critical issues facing our economy and society. As a country deeply committed to Europe, I welcome the opportunity to work with the European Commission's Joint Research Centre and other member states to take stock of our evidence ecosystem. This project will help us future-proof our research for policy agenda, and while we will of course learn from others, I want Ireland to be the leader. As Pericles said, our government does not copy our neighbours, but sets an example to them. That's our ambition, to be the best practice example in evidence-informed policymaking, not just in Europe, but globally. Let us work together to remove barriers, connect policymakers with expertise, and ensure that the decisions shaping our future are grounded in truth, nature, and knowledge. Gribh míle maith agaibh.
And others working online are going to do next. I'm really feeling very optimistic about where we're going. So who or what is the JRC, the Joint Research Centre, in case you don't know? We are a department of the European Commission. We're in fact the largest department. Our job is to bring scientific evidence into public policy. We have labs, we have campuses, we have experiments, we have machines, we have scientific articles, and we work across pretty much the entire range of natural and social sciences, and we work with pretty much every single European Union policy. So our aim is to make the European Union evidence-informed policy. And my team is looking at this problem from a meta level, trying to understand how science for policy works. Why is it so different? What works in getting policymakers to new scientific evidence? What works in getting scientists to bring the right sort of evidence into the policymaking process? And lately, we've been tasked with this job, working with our colleagues looking into public sector reform, to support the member states upgrade their science for policy ecosystem. So to look at the institutions, the processes, the culture, the training, the whole ensemble of the ecosystem of that science and policy is connected, and move to a level where across the European Union, every single member state has a high-functioning science and policy ecosystem, and gradually that we are building a European Union science and policy ecosystem, connecting up policymakers who need knowledge with any scientists across Europe or indeed the world that has it. And when scientists have interesting findings, they find that who need their knowledge. So let me tell you a little bit about what we've learned about this so far. You've heard some wonderful insights today, none of which have to do with very, very powerful insights, Sarah, especially just before the break. But based on our research and on the project that we've run up until now, what have we discovered? It's obviously a no-brainer that science is incredibly important for crafting effective public policies. Public policy problems are so complex, causalities are so difficult to understand. On earth, we going to come up with good problem statements, good evaluation. We don't massively use science across government. But I think perhaps what I haven't heard so much today, apart from the Minister today, is how important evidence for policy is for sustaining our democracy. I think this has been neglected. Democracy that accompany from reality and accurate facts rapidly go wrong. What we see from the work of the OECD is that governments that use science in a trustworthy and effective way end up being more trusted by their citizens. So I think right from the start, it's very important to put this work in the context of the current struggle for our democracies, and that we are players in that great debate, this great battle that is happening around us. Science for policy, evidence-informed policy making is not a nice to have for democracy. It's in fact a cornerstone that sustains our democracy and keeps them grounded in reality, because science is the best kind of reality humans have ever invented. And I think every day we see where this is under pressure. What have we learned about the business of science policy? Why is it so hard? There's basically two answers. One is the technical answer. I think we've talked a lot about that today, which is somehow you need to get the most relevant, robust science on the desk of the decision maker in the right time, in the right place, in the way they understand. And there are so many decision makers and there's so much knowledge. That's a very complex technical problem to get that thing on the desk and then make a decision at the right time. So that's why we talk a lot about knowledge brokers and knowledge synthesis and relationships and all these sorts of things. That is a technical problem. The second half of the problem is when you get those facts there, you don't notice what is going on in their psychology. I mean, maybe they just spit out the facts straight away. And there, the science we've done is very, very clear that the biggest science that governs everything we're doing in this room is the my-side bias. And what the my-side bias says is that when any of us, no matter how intelligent, no matter how open-minded, is confronted by facts that challenge your core values or your sacred identities, we all spit it out and reject it. Now, politics tends to attract a lot of people who are quite passionate about values and these sorts of things. So it is It is a feature, not a bug, that sometimes your science will be rejected. This is a feature of our cognition when it comes to political decision making. So we have to understand how to deal with that. So what have we learned how to deal with these problems? We've understood, of course, that we need to get the supply side organized. And I don't really have a lot more to say than what Sarah said about how you get the supply side organized. But actually, the problem is not really on the supply side. The problem is in the demands. So increasingly, the advice we're giving, we need to create a culture and a reflex amongst politicians and decision makers who ask for the evidence. So I've taken them when I meet them. Next time you're in a meeting, come on, make a factual statement. Just ask them, send you a two-pager substantiating that factual statement. And if we can begin to get the culture working, don't go and see that minister, don't go and see that civil servant if you haven't got the facts straight, then perhaps we change the culture within. Second thing, cardinal rule of our work that we've seen is you've got to have knowledge brokers. This system, this ecosystem will not self-organize. Someone needs to hold the ring, and someone needs to lead the ecosystem, like we have here today. Someone needs to bring together on a regular basis scientists and policymakers across government who don't know each other. So one of the basic bits of advice we've been giving is have a monthly breakfast in the ministry. You have a science talk, provide coffee, and let people stay for an hour thereafter to talk, as we've been doing here today, to engage with the community. Because that's what knowledge brokerage is. We heard a lot about it's about knowledge synthesis, and it's surely that. The acme of being a good knowledge broker is can you synthesize 1,000 scientific papers in 3 bullet points per minute in about it. And the answer is we can in the day, and yes, we really understand that. But the other part of the bit that people always forget is not only what you know, it's who you know. So you need knowledge brokers who know the people inside the government, who they know the people in the academic community, or they know the people who know the people. And they are trusted by both. This is good. So the project, we just finished doing this deep dive with 7 countries across the European Union, together with our friends in the UCD, and we produced a number of recommendations in the end. And we're about to start with 7 more countries. So with Spain, with Poland, with France, with Cyprus, we have Austria, with Portugal, and of course we have Ireland. Movement 7, it's not really easy. What are we trying to do? So first thing, it's not a research project. We don't want to produce a nice report that just sits on the shelf and nothing happens. And these are the people who are giving us the money and saying this, the people in sector and reform in the Commission, they want to see meaningful public sector reforms in each of the countries. And they push us very hard on that. So at the end of the project, we want to end up with a reform program. Ireland is going to meet the objectives set out by the Minister. This could be institutions, it could be procedures, it could be training, culture, a whole range of things. How are we going to get there? We're going to have surveys, we're going to interview everyone essentially in Dublin or Ireland who's interested in this topic, understand what they see as the problem and what the solutions are, and put that together with the aim of producing this report that leads to significant changes in how this is done. We're also going to be training scientists. My colleagues, Alexandra and Anastasia, there have developed training courses where we train scientists in how to basically intake policymakers. Similarly, how we train policymakers to asking for the evidence. We've built competence frameworks. We are in the process of building a manifesto for knowledge brokers. What do the professional competence of these knowledge brokers look like? So a whole range of things that we're doing. But then perhaps the most important thing, Melissa mentioned it, and I mentioned it at the beginning, is we want at the end to create a European science for policy ecosystem. So I think this is like the 10th time I've been in a room like this in various capitals of Europe. Sometimes slightly fewer than this number of people, sometimes a lot more. But there are people like you across the European Union. You don't know them yet. You are going to absolutely love them. They are all struggling with the same problems and challenges we face. They look at themselves a little bit differently, but they are all struggling with the same problems. And you can help each other solve these problems. You are not alone. So we're going to build this community. Already it's there. We had a meeting last week in Brussels. We had 80 people there. So there's a community building online. And at the end, the vision is we have the European Union science policy ecosystem where it is built on trust. So we're bringing the citizens of Europe with us. They know that what we're saying to governments can be trusted and believed. It's useful, it's timely, it's pertinent. Not every country needs to reinvent future institutions. Instead, every country in Europe can support each other. And in fact, we in the GRC can also support the wealth of knowledge. And what I knew before I came here, but it's been brought home by the discussion today by the Minister, we cannot build this without absolutely.
Hello, today I'm joined by the assistant VP and from the Workforce Society in the University of Dublin. And there was provided the team of the Happy, the principal advisor in the Department of the new acronym, Climate, Energy and the Environment, and David joined us as well. And I've been convinced, and I promise I do have questions in my notebook. However, I've been convinced a better way to do this session is rather than going for the prescripted questions, to lean into the knowledge and expertise in the rooms. We have a very esteemed panel representing different parts of the evidence for policymaking ecosystem. So rather than me going to my notebook, I'm going to throw it open from the very beginning. And take a handful of questions and we'll talk about it and we'll see how they do that. They've these questions already. We need to put on the test. So for anybody who wants to get the ball rolling and with anything at all for any or all of our faculty members. I'm very shy crowd. Yeah, great. We got a couple of questions.
Very interesting, and I'm especially interested in the power of the science for democracy, and how we absolutely safeguard our scientific community. So that's just a comment. Thank you for highlighting together.
Brian Darford, University College Cork. I thought in the earlier sessions, Sarah made a great point about the benefits of funding to kind of accelerate the journey we're on at the moment. And the Minister mentioned sort of moving to a leadership position, but that will require those two together, an increase in funding. And I think we're talking about step change in funding. So my question for now is that possible, and or is it necessary? Both of those two parts.
In a minute, come to you on that one, but maybe taking the first comment, I'd appreciate it to comment. And Jerry, might ask you to come in a bit, because I suppose policy making is very often about trade-offs, and in the world you're representing here in one of the more developed departments, I think, in how we manage evidence-informed policy making. And if you could kind of talk to us a bit about how evidence systems can, I suppose, support the balance between environmental ambition, social inclusion and economic sustainability, perhaps, and how you manage that.
Okay, thanks very much. And similarly, I think the comments that David made earlier around democracy are really, really important. And I suppose, we're very lucky we live in a country where people's trust in science is very high, but that we shouldn't be complacent about that. We shouldn't think that will always be there. And I think it's very important that we listen to, the European perspective on that, where clearly there is a diversity of kind of outcomes in that regard. In terms of our own department, I mean, obviously so climate, energy and the environment, we're trying to do transformational things. We're trying to address climate change. We're trying to, address very serious environmental problems, and we're trying to develop and roll out an energy system that's fit for purpose for the 21st century, taking into account issues like affordability, security of supply, and of course dealing with the climate crisis. So, and I mean, the journey that we've been on as a department, so over the last 4 years or so, we've put in place a research and innovation strategy. We've taken what was a kind of a disparate and probably not terribly coherent approach to things at the departmental level, or what had happened was that funding had kind of grown up in various parts of the department organically over time. But we've tried to knit that together. We've developed a strategy. We have much greater visibility at kind of senior management level in the department now, and we're looking at what we're doing in a kind of a coherent way, including the ways we work with our agencies and key agencies like the EPA, like SEAI, and internal agencies that we have in the department like Geological Survey Ireland. So we and others, Board Namona included, ESB included. So we have a lot going on there. But I suppose one of the things that has become clear perhaps to us is that it isn't just about technical and scientific advice. Because clearly in a challenge like climate or energy, we have to think about economic consequences. We have to think about a just transition. We have to think about fairness in society. We have to be able to understand, say, spatial differentiation. So in other words, if we roll out a national policy, do we understand what the ramifications of that are in different parts of the country? Are we able to cope with that? Can we then reflect that back to policymakers? So I suppose what I would say is that we're very, earlier in the day, I was really interested to hear David at the beginning talk about the need to bring together these various kind of advice systems. So, economic advice on the one hand, scientific technical advice on the other hand, health advice perhaps, legal advice, but also then, behavioral science is a theme that for us has really become large. I mean, in some ways, we're in the space of the how we do stuff too. Like, in other words, how do we implement, how do we progress science, or how do we, deliver in terms like how do we actually get delivery in relation to all these things? So really interesting to think about the how and about how the how of evidence to policy can help us with our how of delivery, essentially, which is what the minister and I think all ministers are really interested in. So look, I'll leave it there.
Great, thank you. And I suppose the question of the link between funding jumps and enhanced leadership, it's not always up to the state agency, the scale of the funding allocated, but I suppose as a funding agency, what do you see the role that Research Ireland can play in connecting some of the dots in the ecosystem? So I might hand that over to Dermot.
Thank you. Well, I guess there's two parts to the question. I mean, the first part was, do we need to put more investment in? I mean, I think if you looked at the recent productivity and competitiveness report that came out from Enterprise, it would be pretty clear to say, compared to the small advanced economies, we do need to put more investment in. On the flip side of that, I would say the current government has been putting more investment in. There's been quite a lot of additional funding that's going in, both to the university sector, but also now through things like the National Training Levy being unlocked that will come into infrastructure investment. Certainly the Research Ireland budget has grown. So I think, there is a need for more investment. There's been the beginning of additional investment going in, and the National Development Plan would indicate that there was, at a time of some challenge, there has been more investment put in. I think the flip side of that is that the sector also has to make itself investable, and so how it organises itself, how it demonstrates the kind of leadership we saw earlier from Sarah in terms of how UCL have brought together the collective universities to provide something that can really make an offer back to the country as to what they can deliver in terms of enhanced value, enhanced organisation, enhanced leadership. So I think that piece of making the sector making itself more investable is valid. I would say from a Research Ireland perspective, obviously as a new agency, we've got enhanced responsibility in this space from the agencies that were there before. And I certainly would say that we see investing in public policy as a priority that we need to focus on. I thought the analogy Sarah made earlier is one that we should all kind of just take a minute to reflect upon. There was 2 points she made. One was there is something we can learn from the investment in business development that took place in the universities over the last 20-25 years. And that's very true in the Irish context, you know, through investment in CSETs and then centres, we've built up this incredible capability and infrastructure to build shared models of engagement with industry around agendas that are of mutual interest to the public sector, universities and industry. We haven't put the same energy and the same focus on a public policy perspective, and we haven't really thought about what that could look like if we put a coordinated approach together over a 20-25 year window. And I think that's really the big challenge we need to think about now is what could this space look like in a decade or in 15 years time, and how do we get organised now to enable that? So I think we're very much as an agency up for participating in that conversation and seeing what we could shape. I would say, just to finish that, it's not that that's starting from a place of no activity, and it would be a mistake to say that. There's a lot of activity currently taking place, from the public service fellowships, which have really grown in terms of the amount of applicants coming in, the amount of agencies and departments who are bidding to take those, and the role of academia already in shaping public policy. And you only have to look at the last 12 months at a range of different policies that have come out, be it semiconductor strategies or quantum strategies and new life sciences strategies. There's a huge sense of shaping it from an economic agenda. And then if you look at areas like climate and look at areas like health, there's a huge focus on that too. So we have an activated community who are already beginning to demonstrate how they can make real impact in this space. We've got a new agency, and I think we've got an ambition to do more, but I think we do need to put that invisible infrastructure in place that was talked about earlier.
Thanks, Dermot. And I might, Caroline, just bring you in on that point around making the higher education and research sector more investable, I think is the word we're using, and how higher education institutions and research centres bring their policy priorities more aligned with public policy priorities while protecting academic independence and maybe long-term policy objectives or research objectives.
Thanks very much. And yeah, absolutely. And just maybe to respond to the comments and questions while I'm doing that. So one of the points is in terms of trust. I think that's really, really important and truth. And something I guess is really important for us to remember, particularly in a time where there is such disinformation and more challenges around the quality of evidence, that we have to recognise and protect the places where that's really honoured and minded. It's not the only place, but the universities carry a very particular role in history and producing evidence a bit slowly. None are, we recognise, too slow sometimes, but that rigour. So I think that that's something really for us to recognise, but also, and it's coming through so strong today, that evidence and knowledge is evidence and knowledge that respects the diversity and epistemic justice that was maybe mentioned earlier. You know, that's knowledge, the responsibility to bring together knowledge from the expertise from experience, from our policymakers, the diversity of our complex ecosystem. So I think the university has a really important role to play in relation to that. And then just to maybe say a little bit more about funding, if that's okay. Really, really helpful to hear what's been said so far. So I think there's different dimensions to the investment, to the kind of investment that would be particularly helpful and I think would support the work, you know. So I think, first of all, in terms of making sure we broker the diversity of knowledge, we have to invest in empowering all those who have that expertise to come to the table, especially people with direct lived experience, NGOs, people who don't have the funding, and sort of really investing And I know I brought this up in other forums of really the need for us to have help to invest in. We talk about partnership and co-production and so on, but all of that takes a huge amount of time. It takes not that much, but it takes some money, and sort of the importance of that. And I think the other piece that we can all do and advocate for better is in terms of grant funding, of putting far more investment into the dissemination process and recognising that the journey from the research findings to actually delivering them in an accessible way needs to be supported in that, and doing that in partnership together. And then I suppose just to acknowledge, so as introduced, I'm from the Institute for Life Course and Society, the University of Galway, and that institute, and it's fantastic to meet colleagues from around the other universities running similar types of institutes, but that's a particular investment from the university to promote interdisciplinarity, to have a particular responsibility around equity across the life course, to promote public political engagement and to promote citizen engagement. And that investment allows us to do some of the brokering that we talk about in terms of we've engaged with colleagues, many colleagues here in terms of public policy events for ones we've had in Galway and so on. But again, it's to kind of, I suppose, first of all, recognise that investment and acknowledge it from my own university context, but that it won't happen by itself, and that's been said a few times today. So I think the knowledge brokerage idea is really interesting. I think as well as having good knowledge brokers, and maybe it is an emerging profession as suggested, but I think we all have to become better knowledge brokers, and we all need to be supported in doing that and become more skilled in doing that. So thanks.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Caroline. So we might throw back out to the floor if we have any other questions. Yeah, we have a second mic. Thank you. Here.
Thank you. I'm Michelle Norris from the Geary Institute for Public Policy in UCD. I just wanted to respond to some of the points made by the panel. Firstly, just in terms of David's point about the demand side not being a problem, I suppose I would challenge that view in relation to the social and behavioural sciences in Ireland. So we've seen enormous strides being made through in particular SFI funding for centres in the hard sciences. But certainly in the social sciences, I think our basic research infrastructure is significantly underfunded. And for us, what do we mean by research infrastructure? One of the major areas is just access to data and survey data. So we've seen the CSO make enormous strides in making more administrative data available to academics and other researchers. That's been really valuable, but that absolutely needs to be expanded, and that involves collaboration from ministries. The other area where I feel we're extremely weak and more investment would really help strengthen evidence for policy is just survey data. So we, Research Ireland funds the European Social Survey, which the Geary Institute run. That's enormously valuable evidence for policy, but we're one of the few high-income countries not participating in the World Values Survey, for instance. I was a member of the government's Housing Commission, and we pointed out we're the only high-income country in the world without a National House Condition Survey. So we're developing all this policy in terms of energy retrofit on the basis of extremely weak data. So I just wanted to kind of make that point in response. And then just one other point, I absolutely agree with David's point around the role of evidence and the role of stronger government in underpinning faith into our democracy. And in addition to the points he made, I also think the ability of governments to actually deliver services to address the priorities of publics, of communities around Europe is one of the factors that undermines faith in democracy. And I think evidence for that part of policy, evidence for how we implement policy more effectively is absolutely critical.
Thanks, Michelle. I think there's a couple of other questions quite close to you, and then we'll go to them.
Hi everyone, I'm Jennifer Brandon. I work with Jerry in the Department of Climate, Energy and the Environment. So actually my question is related to Michelle's, and it's really for Paul. It's about the role of, I suppose, data in the evidence for policy ecosystem, and particularly the wealth of data that's held by the CSO and how that can kind of interface with research to inform policy. So I'd just love to know a little bit more about that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. And maybe just with the two related questions, Paul, we might come over to you. And obviously the CSO has been doing an awful lot in making data more usable and accessible, including giving researchers access to national data sets, but there's obviously more to happen, and involved in the CSI project might shape some of that, but I might just ask you to come in there.
No, thanks, Fiona, and thanks, Michelle and Jennifer, for the questions. Yeah, I think we've been doing a fair bit of activity with researchers in recent years, but there can always be more. I think, like, up till say 10 years ago, that type of research would be constrained by data quality in the public service. You know, we had a proliferation of PPSNs, and we didn't have, it wasn't collected across all systems. But now we're in a position where we have really good data that could support longitudinal analysis, AI, all of those good things. But the issue is to convert that into data for research. It's not cheap as such, you know, it needs some investment. So I mean, I think as well as the investment that needs to go into every university, there needs to be investment in infrastructure that's available to all universities as well. And look at, I mean, I'm not making a play for CSO, but it'd probably be cheaper if you did it through CSO. I suppose the other point about surveys, I mean, certainly there's a huge role for surveys, and that's not going to change. I mean, we can answer, you know, a lot of kind of, I suppose, numerical type issues with administrative data, but then when you're getting into the, you know, the facts that are more qualitative, you need to have surveys. The world for surveys is much more difficult than it was. You know, it's difficult to get into apartment blocks and through gates and so on. You know, so it's not easy, but we're working hard to try and improve that through various methods. So look, I mean, we have a data strategy on the way, which will reinforce the importance of surveys. But I mean, if we fully leverage all the admin data, then we're just using surveys for things that we need to know that can't be found out through administrative data. So I think that's the direction for us, and it should be the direction for everyone else as well, I think. And then I suppose the role of data on main evidence for policy, Jennifer, I think it's hugely important that if we want answers to Irish problems, there needs to be Irish data underpinning that research, or else people will inevitably start using Norwegian data or whatever else is available, you know. So I think data is absolutely essential, and kind of well-structured data that's good quality, that's longitudinal, that covers all the dimensions, all that kind of thing. So I mean, that's certainly a focus for us, and I think it's a focus for everyone else as well, is making sure that, you know, the data underpinnings are there for those complex challenges we all have to deal with at the moment. And I suppose the other issue there is that you have departments as well who have research that they want to commission. So I think those departments should engage with CSO and others as early as possible when they're formulating those questions, so that they can kind of set their tenders up so that they already reflect the database, and we can get them over and that stuff straight away.
Thanks, Julie. Another good question here.
Yeah, thanks. Teresa from the Health Research Board, and going slightly out of my lane on this question. I'm not talking about funding on the supply side, but it's really a question for everybody. I'm fascinated to hear how the work progresses. As a funder who has funded very specific policy relevant programs, one of the things that we've noticed over many years is that in our monitoring, in order to show the impact of what we're doing, it can be really, really difficult to track how evidence, even evidence that was asked for, even evidence that was commissioned for, ends up or doesn't end up in policy. And then to flip it into a question, perhaps in terms of your framework for the pieces of work that you're doing for society policy evidence ecosystem, in our rapid assessment of both looking at of the Department of Health's evidence informed decision making. We did a desk-based analysis and then did key informed interviews, and then a number of people in the department mentioned work that they had commissioned, conducted and done. You couldn't find it in the policy documents and the sample documents. And so I suppose my question is, we don't, in a research for evidence or a research for policy ecosystem, one of the things that we haven't really talked here today is transparency and perhaps accountability around what did you look for, what did you not look for, what did you get through surveys, focus groups, advisory groups, think tanks, commissioned evidence, and what did you use and how did evidence or lack of evidence inform decision making? It's perhaps not the most popular question to ask, and I'd be interested in Dennis's view on this as well. But I do think we have to follow the thread, and if we're going to talk about transparency, trust, and if we're talking about additional investment to go in here, and I say that not in a critical way, but actually from the perspective that we've talked about things that are invisible in the system here, and I'm conscious of a lot of time and energy and funding and work that has gone into, and where we know it has informed decision making, but you can't see it. So I was just wondering if anybody has any comments on that, but particularly in the context of your framework and where that fits in. Thank you. Thank you.
So this relates partly to the reason why I said don't neglect the demand side. I mean, I don't know exactly what it feels like in Ireland, but I can guess. Is, you know, historically there's always been a gross mismatch between the supply of science and the number of people who have the time and space to read it and engage with it. This is now reaching epic crisis proportions. The poor people, the poor policy makers, the decision makers, the policy inside government are being pushed from pillar to post. They just, I've had people say to me, David, stop sending us reports, 1 or 2 pages, maybe if you're lucky, I'll look at it. And these are good people doing their best, but there is an unbelievable bandwidth constraint on the side of the policymaker. And therefore, my plea would be, don't just pump a whole lot of money into providing more reports if there is no consequent matching of people on the other side who's going to read them. Otherwise, you've actually made the problem worse, not better. So I'm not yet in a position to say whether there needs to be more money spent on the supply side or not, but don't neglect the demand side in that. And therefore, questions of attribution and impact becoming even harder. I think if you have to choose, you would rather there was actually some impact rather than there was a trace of an impact. Ideally, I think we need to move to a place where, governments, when they put forward decisions, show the evidence base they've used, what's included in that base, what's not excluded, what weight they've given to different pieces of evidence. But that's certainly where our work will be going, to try and give recommendations in that line. But it's going to be very difficult in the current context to do this. And also behind this lurks my sort of behavioural science folk knowledge, which is that we have something called belief change bias. So we do change our mind, and then our brain kind of denies that we ever held that different position. So, if you want to get saying people say, look, you changed your mind because of my evidence, can you please write it down and publish it that you changed your mind and you saw the light because of my evidence? That seems to be tricky and maybe actually undermine the business of you're going against human nature there. And ultimately, I don't think we should be trying to make policy making like science and policy documents full of citations, and then you get statistical behaviour with scientists. They're not interested in real impact, they're just interested in having a footnote to their article in the policy paper, and that seems to be a deviation from where we want to get to. And at the end of the day, for me, the only metric that really, really counts about impact is, do the decision makers want the scientists in the room? Do they say, does the minister say look, I need to hear from this person before I take the decision? That is, I think, the place we want to get to, where they are seen as trusted and reliable and essential to the process, not any particular reference in a document or anything. That's where I come.
Thanks, David. And we're just kind of running out of time. We'll take there's 2 more questions, so we'll take them very, very briefly. If the next speakers don't mind being a couple of minutes late.
Hi, thanks. Linda Conley. I just wanted to make a remark. I think just listening to the discussion as well, what you thought of this. So I think I'm obviously a social science perspective, but I think it's important as well. We don't have an overly instrumentalist, rationalist version of what policy or research are and what impact is. And I just was giving the example earlier of somebody whose office was below me for quite a while, and then he turned out to win the Booker Prize because he wrote a book. And so I think culture is missing from the analysis. There are a lot of people working in research who are in a whole range of disciplines, whether it's languages or literature, or even within the social sciences, not just doing quantitative statistics, but very innovative lived experience and qualitative work. So I think it's very important we build into the analysis of research for policy culture. To give another example, I won't name the band, some people might know what I'm talking about. They've done more for reviving the Irish language probably than all the policies on the shelf and so forth. Let's not go down that road. But again, I think culture is very important, and also that impacts on generation then as well, because if we're talking about research for policy, of course our other activity for many of us is education, and that involves working with students and PhD students and so forth. So I would be very much advocating for research for policy that can also deal with culture, with discourse, and there will be other things we're talking about in a museum of literature. Thank you.
And Linda, and we take just the last question here, and then I'll bring it up.
Thank you, Rhoda Jennings from University College Cork. This question probably follows more on from what Teresa brought up. And it's in terms of, if you look at something like climate policy and climate litigation or climate legislation, it's being litigated in the courts on the basis of the scientific evidence underpinning the legislation and the policy. So I'm just want to get the panel's view in terms of creating science advisory structures, how this might influence these challenges, whether in a negative or a positive way. So in a positive way, I suppose, depending on what angle you're coming from, there's structure to follow. It's a structure that has informed the policy and the legislation. But then equally, in terms of transparency, if certain information hasn't been relied on, could this be used again to sort of bring further challenges? Just to get the panel's view on that.
Thank you. We might take Linda's question first, and just that question about broad spectrum research informing, and I might, Caroline, ask you to come in if you would.
Thanks very much. It's a super question and so important to highlight. And I suppose what came to mind as you were speaking, Linda, is really, I think maybe the culture piece in terms of the culture of how we produce knowledge may address that. And so the culture, you know, it's not just an add-on, it's an absolute necessity that we all recognise the importance of committing to a culture that produces knowledge, that hears the range of voices, the range of data, that ensures there's a diversity of perspectives. And in doing that, we're recognising the responsibility that what good data and evidence is a mix, a diversity of data, and the transparency, I suppose, comes from being very, very clear about that. And it's not quite related, but if, you know, something that strikes me as well in terms of what we can all do, research communication. I think, you know, that journey from where we do the research to how we communicate it, you know, it's come up in a number of different ways. You might say that's a very simple way to be finishing, but I do think it's fundamental. And we should recognise how far we've come. There are some super examples of collaborations from many people in this room and outside of it, where we have improved massively in terms of the 200 policy report is now 20 pages. Okay, it's not by 1 page yet, but that's quite an achievement, and working in partnership. So I think it's really important how we collect our knowledge and how we communicate it. And I think we all have a shared commitment there.
Thanks, Caroline. Might just pick up on the last question, Rhoda, and go to Jerry on this. And I suppose, Jerry, I presume Department of the Environment has had a fair bit of experience with the new dynamic that legal challenges is bringing. And if any reflections on Rhoda's question?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, climate policy, like every other policy areas, we're JR'd quite frequently, and we're in the courts quite a bit. But I mean, I think what I would focus on is the fact, say that the department in formulating the legislation that underpins climate policy and doing climate policy over the years. We have worked with a variety of partners in a very structured way to produce evidence for the government and to underpin those decisions. I mean, we've published lots of, like, so for instance, when we allocated emissions reductions across sectors, we published the modelling that underpinned those decisions. The government published that, and I mean, for instance, on the climate modelling front, like we have a consortium of academic providers who we work with, but they all publish in the academic literature. So, a lot of what we're doing, it's there. Other people can interrogate it. People can use it. There's nothing at the end of the day, I think, we can do to control who walk into a court and, ask the court to adjudicate on something. But I think what we can do is make sure that we have, really good science available to us from a variety of sources. Because I think the other thing that's important here too is we're often working at this kind of science policy interface. So there is evidence, but then policy is about making decisions based on evidence. And there are judgments to be made in doing that. And that gets back to the point that Barry made this morning around, public policy being based on three elements, which is data and evidence, feasibility and implementation, and legitimacy. And I think our elected officials, have to make really important decisions around, so we're suggesting courses of action, but they have to think about, well, is it implementable? Can it be delivered? Obviously, that's hugely important. But also, does it have kind of legitimacy? In other words, is it something that's in our program for government, for example, or is it something that citizens will accept? Those are really important things in democracies. But at the end of the day, I think for citizens and various interest groups to be able to see broadly the information we've used to feed into policy, I think is important. I mean, to the earlier point around, I think we were looking internally in the department recently at how do we're thinking about how we measure impact of the kind of research we fund. And it's very difficult because even where we know that probably research has underpinned certain policy documents, it's not in the policy document. Now, sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. But and that kind of, but I think, so for us, a lot of the work that we're doing is on that in that area is to just make sure that civil servants across the department are able to are comfortable kind of using information and knowing what's available to them and being able to try and get it if that's possible, and then to utilize that in the ways that they see fit in doing public policy. But there's no perfect answer here. There's no, but I think we'd be happy if we think that, yes, on critical issues, I think let's publish and make sure that the evidence is out there. More broadly, that we have a culture on the demand side, as David was saying, where we know civil servants and ministers will ask for this and look for it. And that's really important. And so just to conclude, like days like today, I think are really important because they say to the system more generally, evidence informing policy is really important. And we're always having to kind of just remind ourselves of that.
Yeah,
thank you.
Really well, main point. We're slightly over time, so I might just go to everybody for a last 30 seconds. So we're embarking on the TSI project now. If there was just one thing you would hope that the lessons we take from the TSI project that is reflected in it, you might have given it to us already, Caroline, on the research communications, but if you've got another one, that would be great. So, Diarmuid, if you want to start or hand it down to Paul, whichever way, if anybody's ready with the what you think the most important thing.
I'll just start maybe just quickly to say David's point earlier about learning from our EU colleagues. That's the bit that we'd really like to get out of this project. Working with partners elsewhere, like minds. Let's kind of leverage that. If we can do that, we're a small peripheral island on the edge of Europe. We need to utilize that entire knowledge base in all the member states.
Yeah, well, I mean, the mission of what we want to try and get out of the project is quite inspiring. I mean, where I think we need to be doing better here to feed into that is a kind of idea of how we connect the fragmented infrastructure we have, that invisible infrastructure, to really create something that's of scale and that can be convened in a way to really, I suppose, provide a more integrated agenda here. So I think that's probably where we need to go as a country.
Yeah, great. And I think, you know, building on that as well as infrastructure and systems, I think something that really strikes me, I think it's very exciting, really great opportunity for us in terms of the dynamic features, the competencies, you know, that kind of message that whatever structures we have, a lot of it keeps coming back to some of those core themes of the competencies, the trust, the relationships, those dynamic features, and that I suppose is reinforced again for the experience of being here today. So that was my point.
Okay, so it's kind of a particular one, more infrastructure, data infrastructure, but I think the other thing, anytime we do any engagements with departments, data literacy comes up an awful lot. And I think maybe it's slightly broader in this context, it's kind of evidence literacy or something like that. I'm glad to hear that David's team does that, government departments. That could be very important in setting up a context for this for the programme.
I would like to deliver on the minister's goal and help make Ireland a leading player in this space.
Great, thank you very much, and thank you to all the panel and all the questions from the audience. Thanks a lot.
Thanks to everybody, A, for staying in the room at this late stage, and B, for contributing so much to the discussion today. So there's a lot of material I've been reflecting, as you can imagine, all day on how to distill the really rich and valuable discussion that we've had. And I say it is extraordinary to have so many people in the room engaged with this agenda. So I think I'll sum it up in one infamous slogan: a lot done, more to do. No attribution. I think it's probably worth thinking about the actual organisation and holding of this event before we get into some of the more detailed issues that I think emerged in the course of the discussion. I think it's quite exceptional. It's exceptional. I think there's three things, it seems to me, that are exceptional about the organisation of today's event. The first is that it was co-organised by 2 universities and a government department. That's not normal, that's not usual. And I think just you know, it's taking time to recognise and acknowledge that, and to acknowledge the work of the individuals that put it together and their vision for greater collaboration. A different way of doing things across the system in itself is worthy of reflection. So the second thing I would say is that it's important to recognise just the richness and diversity that's in the programme. I've been quite struck all day by the various inputs. We've had the keynote addresses, and we've heard from the JRC, and that's been complemented by actual on the ground lived experiences of a range of people, from policymakers, academics and funders. And again, not a normal, usual conversation in our world, so worth thinking about that. And the final thing I would say, even though I've probably done this in reverse order, is the decision to actually hold it, to hold a conference on research for policy, to me is like a massive step forward. So coming at this really from my own story, those of you who know me will know I spent just over 4 decades working in the civil service. So a lot of that time was spent in the Department of the Taoiseach. So I had, if you like, a bird's eye view of the system, both the civil service system and the I suppose, the wider policy making landscape. And I was always convinced that we could do better, we could do more, we could use our resources more sensibly, more productively, just better, and make things better for the people working in the system and the people and our society generally. If we took the time and made the effort to have conversations about, well, what could we do better, and how could we develop better policy using the resources that we have available to us. So when I retired in 2018, Jane Allmeyer offered me a visiting fellowship in Trinity, and during that time I wrote a paper, and it's interesting, isn't it, when you look back? It was called Research for Public Policy, Building an Architecture for Ireland. And here we are. I mean, it's really, there's a bit of me, there's a slight disbelief in all of this, that those years later, we have come on this journey, and we've come today to this room having developed so much thinking and done so much in building that architecture. And it's worth thinking then about what we wanted to do today. So just looking back, as typical policymaker, I looked for the origins of this, of today's event, and we wanted to convene key decision makers across Ireland's research policy ecosystem to further the national conversation about how we build systemic, coordinated connections between research and policy so that high quality evidence can more readily inform all stages of the policy making process. And we've certainly given that a good airing today, I think. And we have heard and learned from each other in the formal sessions and in the informal sessions. And it's clear that there's an emerging further set of work to be done. I've been struck all along by the positive tone in the room. It's, as I say, it's a wide range, diverse interests, but it's clear that a shared agenda has emerged. I mean, I think that's where we are. And that what I think David Peterson said, the coalition of the willing has emerged. And I think so. So for me, we are past that first stage. The second thing I would say is, going back to some work that I did in the early days with some colleagues, the Royal Irish Academy published a roadmap in relation to evidence for policy. And I'll just very briefly talk you through that there were three pathways that we identified. And again, I was very heartened today to see that many of the themes we identified then are the themes we're working with now. And I think that's a really good thing. So our first pathway was building bridges, creating trust, and offering opportunities. So again, those themes that have resonated with us so much today. Our second theme was joining up and scaling up. And there was some discussion around that today, but I think that set of issues is one that we probably haven't given as much thought to, but we're going to need to in the next iteration. And the final pathway that we identified back in 2021 was knowledge management and knowledge brokerage, which I know should now be called knowledge mobilization. So what I'm really saying here is that the pathways that I think we've individually and collectively been on, well, they've stood the test of time, and I would suggest that the ones that we should work with as we move forward. So just talking a little bit about what we've learned today, I just wanted to pick out a couple of things from our keynote speakers. So when David Peterson, I think he did us a great service by sharing his learning about what an ecosystem would look like, what an approach to building an ecosystem looks like, and the kinds of practical steps that need to be taken now to make progress on this agenda. Sarah, in her presentation, I think, gave us three things to think about, which we I think will work with in the coming months and years. She talked about building capacity in organizations, sustaining connections across the ecosystem, and enabling collaboration and evidence use. So again, no great surprise to us, but good for us, I think, to see these put forward based on international experience. Gives us confidence as we move to the next phase. Another thing I would pick out is the very helpful vision that John O'Connor gave to us in his presentation, where he talked about what we're trying to do here, because it is quite difficult to define it on occasion. He talked about timely access to research-based evidence by receptive policymakers with absorptive capacity to incorporate evidence into decision-making processes. Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, but it does actually encompass, I think, all the various elements that we need to think about in the doing of this. And then he complemented that by talking to us about motivation, capability, and opportunity. So, in conclusion, I want to highlight what I heard as some of the key themes. You'll be glad to know there's only, I think, 4 or 5 of them. So the first one is the importance of connectivity. And it seemed to me that mapping is the crucial first step now, and that we should be able to do that both with the TSI and with the knowledge brokerage project that the people in Maynooth are working on, and other projects that, you know, certainly in about a year or 18 months, we should have a much better sense of what our existing ecosystem looks like. And in that context, just to acknowledge again, as the Minister did, the amount of work which has been done and the amount of architecture which has been built. And given the time, I won't go over that, but it is really striking how much has been done in a relatively short period of time. A second key theme, and a very challenging one, is the structured conversation. You know, how do we build those bridges between the various pillars? We've heard examples of fellowships. We need to think about how they go in both directions. We need to think about, you know, how we communicate in both directions, supply and demand, how we communicate the results of research, how that gets into policy. Because there's a whole series of themes there. But again, it's a sort of a bucket or a basket of things that we need to engage with. A third big theme that emerged, no surprise, is absorptive capacity building on both sides. So again, trying to figure out, because you can't do everything at the same time, what would be really helpful next steps in the doing of that. The role of funding agencies, not just Research Ireland or HRB, but there's a collection, I think, of funding streams available into the research system. So again, they play a vital part in deciding what gets done by whom. So if we're to advance on this agenda, we do need to recognise that they are a key part of the overall strategic development and infrastructure. And we look forward certainly to the Research Ireland strategy, which I think will be really important in this context. And the final piece that I heard was this issue of knowledge mobilisation. Many strands, too many to really talk about. But if we collectively believe, the people in this room, that that is our agenda, and those are, and if you like, developing our approaches, learning by doing, trying things, experimenting a little bit, you know, not necessarily part of our culture, but one that I think we do have to try and develop a bit more. I think knowledge, the whole agenda on knowledge mobilisation is one that we should put our collective minds to. So finally, I wanted to just make 2 points about what I think, where we are at this point and what we should be thinking about for the future. And somebody earlier in the day talked about right place, right time. And I reckon, you know, we're pretty good in terms of being in the right place at the right time. Departmental leadership, the TSI project now, the projects that the funding agencies have funded. There's an upcoming HRB research conference. There's an upcoming conference on education. So the sectors are beginning to get themselves organised. So I think we are in the right time and in the right place. And what we need to do, I think, and what this today has helped us to do is to develop further our next stage, our next stage actions. And I would draw attention to something that I think isn't often recognized, which is in all our busyness, where is the space we're creating for identifying gaps? You know, where are those places that maybe as you know, we're kind of short term, or we're at best medium term. We're not great at long term, and I think we have to get better at long term. So we do need to find within this overall agenda for action a space to give people time to think about, well, what does it look like in 20 years' time potentially, and what do we not know now that we think we might know? So it's the piece around bad decisions avoided, I guess. But that's really, really important in the doing of this. It might be easy to point to bad decisions avoided, but in terms of democracy and in terms of what we're trying to do, I think it's a very legitimate part of the agenda. So in conclusion, thanks again to the people who organised that. Thank you all for coming, and I think you've given us collectively lots of food for thought. So let's see what the next period brings. Thanks very much for that.
Then it's just left for us to close the conference, so I'm going to hand over to Rachel, who's going to close it on behalf of Maynooth. Thanks.
Good evening, everybody. To all of those of you who are online and here in the room, thank you for lasting out what's been a wonderful day at this Research for Policy conference. So I'm going to take a bit of a risk now and divert from my prepared remarks, because the conversations today gave me a lot of food for thought. And also something quite interesting and wonderful happened on the way here. So I was late. And the reason that I was late is because there were Gardaí all around Dublin city centre and the traffic was stopped. And as I was stopped in my taxi, thinking that I was going to miss the sandwiches, which I did, the presidential cavalcade went past, and it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. And as I was thinking about that, I felt sort of quite excited and maybe emotional, because maybe this is the beginning of a new time, but it's based on a wonderful foundation of history. So our new president, our 10th president, was inaugurated today. And as I was listening to the conversations, what I heard was that in this space, there's been a wonderful foundation of work. We've got all the work to learn from elsewhere, but thinking about Mary's remarks just now about the paper from 2018 and all the preparation work that's been done, we're now embarking on a new era in this work, I would say. So I joined you after lunch. I didn't get the sandwiches. And I know for those of you who were here for all of the day, I suspect that your brains are pretty full. Your notebooks are probably really, really full as well. And the coffee, which might be slightly overcooked, might have started to have a slightly odd effect. So I'll try and keep that all in mind as I wrap up. I want to say that events like these, as has been pointed out, that bring together institutions, departments, different universities, take an awful lot of planning to make happen. And we have a number of people to thank, which I'm going to do in a moment. So what has happened today is that we have heard that connections between research and policy need to be made stronger. So for everybody who has contributed, whether it's online or by being here in the room, everybody who's spoken, everybody who has moderated and listened, your participation means that this event will have great reach and meaning. What I sense here today is a shared purpose. I think this has already been said, maybe using different words. It's the coalition of the willing. And despite all of our different roles here in the room today, whether we're researchers, policymakers, analysts, civil servants, we're all trying to do the same thing. We're trying to use the knowledge that is created at universities to make people's lives better. We've heard about frameworks and acronyms and methodologies aplenty, but beneath all of that, this has been a conversation about people. I'm a psychologist, I would say that, but I heard that a lot. It's about people, it's about trust, it's about understanding, and it's about how evidence, when we the people treat it well, can help shape wise decisions. And universities have a significant role to play in this work. We believe that we are the largest producers of publicly funded research, and our role isn't just to generate the evidence. Our role is to ensure that that evidence travels well, that it reaches, as has already been said, the right tables, and that it is understood in that context. And this conference, this special day, is a great example of what you can do when you collaborate across institutions. So on that note, I want to thank all of our partners at UCD for helping us host today's event. I also want to thank my Maynooth colleagues, Professor Mark Boyle, Dr. John O'Connor and Sean O'Fallon from Maynooth University Social Sciences Institute. The leadership of the Institute has been incredibly helpful in organising this work. At Maynooth, we're planning to build on the momentum that's been created by this work. We're establishing something that we're calling the Maynooth Futures Hub, which is being supported by HEA performance funding. And what the hub intends to do is bring coherence and visibility to our research themes, and to echo the aims of today, make sure that what happens in our laboratories, our archives, our fieldwork has a clear line of sight to policy and practice. Now, one of the things, again, that's already been said, and I think Sarah said it beautifully, is that it feels as if what we're taking part in is a living ecosystem. I can't quite remember the words that she used, but it was a fungal example. It was the ecosystem of the trees. She had the right scientific lingo, but she described a living ecosystem, and she was right. I thought we should have swapped notes about our speeches, and then we wouldn't have duplicated. The duplication is probably really good evidence that we're all on the same page. So policy, research and public services are like different species within the same environment, and each one has its own rhythm and its own language and its own needs. And for that ecosystem to thrive, we need respect, we need dialogue, and we do need a bit of patience. So there was a question earlier about how could we maybe skip some of those steps, maybe accelerate things. You can't rush trust, can you? You can create the conditions in which it can grow. And that's what days like this do. They remind us that behind every data set and every policy brief are people who care deeply about improving lives. And that's what unifies research and policy communities. So as we finish, what do we take away? For me, it's that building a stronger research for policy ecosystem isn't just technical, it's a human exercise. It relies on the trust and the leadership and the willingness to share. It's about optimism. It's about the belief that evidence and ideas handled with integrity can truly make a difference. Returning to the living ecosystem, our community thrives when its parts stay connected. When we learn from each other, we strengthen one another through these connections. So once again, thank you to the organisers, all of the teams from Maynooth and UCD, speakers and panellists and everybody here online. It's been a long day. I hope that we carry with us the sense that this work matters and that through collaboration, evidence and shared purpose, we can help build fairer policies and a better society. Go raibh maith agam, go léir agus slán a bhaile.